And this month's Where Did the Road Go is sponsored in part by Allison Cook, Super Inframan, and Eric Hervin. Thank you all so much for your support. And if you want to become a patron and help support Where Did the Road Go, you can do so at wheredidtheroadgo.com. It's only $3 a month. You get extra content all month. You can also support the show through donations off the website or pick up some merch, all available at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com.
Transmission start. Welcome to Where Did the Road Go? Join us as we wander off the path and explore lost history, consciousness, the paranormal, unexplained mysteries, alternative thought, and much more. We are present on the web at wheredidtheroadgo.com. Now here is your host, Seriah.
Welcome to this edition of Where Did the Road Go? And I have with me Mr. Joshua Cutchin.
Greetings.
And Taylor Bell.
Hey.
Of the awesome Green Lion podcast. I want to get that out there right from the beginning.
Thank you.
So go check out his podcast. And Josh is everywhere.
I'm everywhere, and it feels like in my own personal life, nowhere. So walking conundrum, I guess.
So you wanted to do this show. You want to try and explain the topic of this show, Josh?
Well, yeah. So I get a lot of correspondence from people who are looking to be some sort of content creator regarding the paranormal or whatever. And I kind of get disheartened because I see a lot of people start off with like big goals and they sort of lose track or they sort of lose their way. And I would sort of like to get into like just like the process for me, at least, behind selecting a topic for a book, the things that I learned, the missteps that you can make, and just sort of that whole process in terms of a means of encouraging people who are interested in writing something or, you know, producing really any sort of content. And maybe you can speak to the podcasting side of it too.
Yeah.
Hey,
I have 2 books started.
Yeah, right. But you know, I think that people think that it's this big monumental task, and it is, but it's just like anything, you know, like how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time. So yeah, I thought we could dig into that. I don't know if you want me to sort of start off. I feel like I'm presenting a book report or something right now.
Well, I can tell you up front, I'm writing 2 totally different types of books. I'm writing one on personal experiences, which is hard in the fact that I have a lot of notes to go through, years and years worth of journals of all this stuff. And that's just taking time. There's a lot of self-reflection going on. And it's just a lot to go over, and the book's going to be way longer than I had any anticipation of. But doing the alternate theories books, I mean, the thing I'm running into is that I'm writing about this and I'm writing about this, and then I'll see a note that, oh, so-and-so had a theory, and I'm like, wait, what's that? Now I got to track down that book because I want to see what they said, and if it's close to what I'm saying, great, and if it's not, I want to add it in or at least reference it, but I don't know what it is, so I have to find the book. You know, and so that's the slow part there. Verifying data and trying to cover all the bases.
Yeah, and that's the thing that I think. So it really is a double-edged sword, right? Because if you come from sort of a grad school background like I do, being a nerd, it's really integral that you get a good, solid lit review. And you know, I've run across some people who think they have an original idea, and I'm like, yeah, actually, there's an earlier precedent for that. So you want to do that, but at the same time, you know, you've got to make the cut somewhere, you know, because if you are a completionist like I am, you end up just sort of going through all sorts of things and feeling like you have to, you know, beat the same point home 10 different times from 10 different sources because look, that shows a trend, right? But you just got to sort of realize that pick the best things and then go from there. But it really does turn into a spider web. And that's sort of the problem that I'm running into with my project right now is because start talking about one thing in the paranormal and it will lead you to another thing, and this is related, but in order to explain how this is related, you've got to understand this other thing. And before you know it, you're talking about, Indo-European horse sacrifice, regarding and how that fits into. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, I'm actually going to be talking about that in this book. I've
been running into a very similar situation. Oh, sorry. I'm trying to do some research right now as well, and that thing, that web that you're explaining, that things just lead to other things that need to be explained, and it all kind of becomes a big pool, and it's overwhelming sometimes.
But I think that's part of what makes it such a rewarding field, and for me makes it exciting is that interdisciplinary approach. Like, you can take postmodernism and apply it to the paranormal. You can take biology and apply it to cryptozoology. You can take all these different things that seem to be completely unrelated and draw them into this, because I would argue that the paranormal is sort of the story of mankind, which is why that you can do that so well. But it really is just about just making that cut somewhere, I guess. Now, as far as a podcast perspective, I have no idea where I would begin to make the cut. I mean, my books get longer the more I write them. So I would probably end up doing a podcast that was like, I'd probably end up doing Dan Carlin's Paranormal, like just doing a season of just like one topic, right?
Yeah, that's kind of the situation I'm running into is, figuring out, I have a general topic and I've got a direction I want to go with it. And all of these other things keep popping up that I need to provide as backbones or foundation so that the topic that I'm trying to head towards actually makes sense.
Yes.
But it's just like, it's just too much. So what do? Do you break it into a series of episodes or whatever? In the case of a book, obviously you've got a lot of page real estate to work with, but I don't know.
And it's sort of like a nonfiction version of jumping into the middle of a TV series that has an arc storyline. Because you're going, if someone just jumps in and they don't know anything about it, they're going, what the hell is going on? So if you've been following along, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. So at the same time, you kind of want to present the basic construct for the people who are jumping in without bogging down on the basic construct, so you can get to the deeper level of it.
Yeah, this speaks to something that I think about, that I wrestle with a lot with, a Trojan Feast, and I sort of found my way around it since then. But when writing it, I was like, who am I writing this for? Is this, how much do I need to explain? If I mention a UFO flap, do I need to sort of define that? And what I settled on was go ahead and write it for somebody who doesn't know anything about the topic. But you can ensure that it's also relevant to people who know a lot about the topic by explaining something in like a throwaway sentence and giving people an idea of where to look for more information on that.
Yeah.
Now, of course, the good news is with, if you're sourcing your books like I do, those endnotes point people in a lot of different directions. And I've had a lot of people come back and say, I'm really, really enjoy the fact that I wanted to know more about this and I could find out exactly where it came from and I could follow that rabbit hole. But I think that it really is important, especially if we're sort of quasi-evangelizing about the paranormal, which I think we all are to a certain degree, to make it something that people who are newbies can read. Like my mom and dad could read this and understand it, or Seriah could read it and understand it. So just
I don't understand anything you write. It's just gibberish to me.
Just gibberish. It just looks like I just sat on I put a cat in front of the keyboard and just had it tap.
Yeah,
tap,
pretty
tap
much.
away.
Yeah, I just fake it.
Now, Taylor, the thing you were talking about, the broadness or the narrowness, like there is a certain virtue in being laser focused about something.
Yep.
Quoth the bard, brevity is the soul of wit, I guess, right? And I think I think that just like keeping it really tight and saying, not I guess keeping it tight and keeping it more for people who are invested in these topics is sort of the angle that I'm getting at. And that's definitely something that, and it's an admirable approach that I think probably works better when you do have those constraints of the podcast, but maybe you can speak to that.
And keeping it engaging too. I think that's somebody wants to sit down and listen to a podcast. They don't necessarily want to have 2 hours of background information on what exactly the field of ethics and epistemology are.
Right, and in the spoken word has strengths and weaknesses that the written word doesn't. Right, I can section off a paragraph of explanation or something in the written word that might not flow as well with the spoken word, but the spoken word you can impart so much more with inflections that you can in writing it as well.
That's true.
How do you? So I guess Seriah, you choose topics for podcasts based on casting fishing lines into the Slack channel and seeing who wants to do a show that week, right?
Well, those are the wandering the road shows. I mean,
right.
I mean, most of the time I'll get a book from somebody and be like, and I'll always I try to read everyone's books. There are times where, like, I have one that I just did recently that's not up yet on with Robert Sullivan on cinema symbolism, and he's like, "Well, the book's 800 pages," and I'm like, "Okay, you could just send me notes,"
Yeah.
Like that's a really big book on just movies and connections and stuff. And I mean, that's how I've done it with him in the past because all his books are huge. So if it's like that, it's one thing. But if it's a subject I'm really interested in, I mean, I did probably almost 4 hours with, oh my God, I'm going to blank on his name. Scott Crichton on his Pyramid Void Enigma book, which was fantastic. And I, took 1 million notes reading the book. So, I mean, I'll start reading a book. And if it seems like this is really interesting, I'll contact them to make sure they'll come on because I only have so much time to read things and then go from there. And then other times it's like, okay, I want to do a show. I'm not totally sure what of, and that's when I'll jump into the Slack channel with all the co-hosts and be like, who wants to do a show? And then we'll just go wherever with it. Or I have one news article we could start with and then just kind of wander because there are so many interconnections that, like, once you start down one path, you're going to find other paths to continue on generally.
Well, I mean, yeah, I think that's really the secret sauce of Where Did the Road Go is the fact that, like, generally speaking, people, those of us who are regulars, like, actually have something we want to talk about when we pop on, right? So everybody's sort of got their own passionate little side project. What about you, Taylor? How do you pick stuff to pursue?
Yeah, I'm very early on in kind of the concept of my podcast right now. I have an idea of what I want it to be sort of in my head, and I'm working towards that. It's proving to be a lot more difficult than I had hoped. But part of it is actually very highly inspired by the way that you take notes in your books, Josh, is the kind of, I don't know, gosh, what's the word for it? Like the fortitude of it, right? Like how well constructed the material is and how it's based on reliable information, or like at least you provide your sources, right? And you're putting things out there in a way that is kind of simultaneously interesting and academic. And I haven't really been able to do that yet because it's a very big process. So what I've been working on recently is what will hopefully be kind of the first of that style of episode. And I guess the way I pick a topic would really just be what's interesting to me. But the other thing is interviewing people or kind of talking to people. So I recently did one with Stephanie Quick on witness testimony. That was something that we had been talking about on Twitter, just kind of back and forth about the relevancy and reliability of witness testimony. And I said, let's do a show on this. And that actually is sort of feeding into the project that I'm working on right now, this kind of big episode. I say big, it probably won't end up being that long. It'll probably only be an hour, but yeah.
Well, that's really kind of you to say that. And I'm excited to hear where this is going. Yeah, I mean the I guess I've sort of become an endnote fetishist or something at this point because I kind of like get a thrill the fact that I see look, I've got 2,700 endnotes here now, and I probably go overboard. And there's probably a better way to do it, but for me, I think it was just it was insurance. especially with that first book, like I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know how to trust reliable sources from non-reliable sources. And what I settled on was, I'll use my own judgment for separating that out. But what I'll do is I'll say, if I make a claim, you'll know exactly where it comes from.
Right.
So I didn't say this, but
right.
you will know exactly where it comes from. And that was the idea. And, if anybody out there is worrying about, as I did, what style to do endnotes in or whatever, I would say just pick a style and be consistent.
I will correct you on that, and I will say Chicago style to the end.
Oh, see, I'm like this hybrid APA thing.
Deep dish or death.
I know, right? Well, I mean, but it's still not quite hardcore APA. But like, I think the important thing that whether or not we're a house divided here, Chicago or APA, I think we would both agree that like as long as there's a quasi-academic side to this field, but like as long as you are consistent and you are clear with things, like you can kind of do your own thing. Like in the beginning, I was like, do I need to cite page numbers? But that gets sort of iffy when you're talking about the general gestalt of a book, or a section. You don't want to say, you don't want to say, page 5, page 12, page 14. Right. I didn't know how to make that cut, so I just said, here's the the work. You can find it in there.
Just so you know, I have no idea what APA stands for, and the only reference I have for it is an old wrestling organization called the Acolyte Protection Agency from back in the end of the 90s in the WWF. So you're saying APA, and I'm thinking Ron Simmons and JBL. Like what's happening here?
American Psychological Association.
Okay.
Some people.
You're absolutely right. Oh, I was going to say you're absolutely right. Consistency is key. Regardless of whether you're sticking to some strict criteria or kind of making it up, as long as you develop a system and stick with it, at least through the body of a work, I think that's what's important.
Well, also people expect that of you, though, from future work.
That's true.
So if Josh suddenly put out a book with no notes, people would be like, what, did he get lazy?
But if you put out a book with different styles of notes, most people probably wouldn't notice.
That's also true.
Yes. Yeah.
It sort of frustrates me because I find I'll go back and look and I'll find something that isn't formatted quite the same for whatever reason. I was having a brain fart that day or whatever, but I talk about it as this form of insurance, and it's saved my tail on more than one occasion, because some stuff has made it out into one of my published books where the information was wrong, but what I said was exactly in the source that I said. Now, if I know that beforehand, I'll leave that out. If it's something from like Phil Imbrogno, with that whole debacle that happened a while back, in terms of his credibility being, called into question, I'll willingly leave that out. I have certain policies like that. But this example that I'm thinking of was a great story from that I included in Brimstone Deceit from Jerome Clark about a plane that landed and the whole crew was dead and there was the smell of sulfur in it. And I think Jerry Clark subsequently had proven that to be a hoax. But I cited it. And it was clear exactly where it came from.
Right,
so that's I said, this, if I ever get a chance to redo it, I'll take that out. But
it was only a supporting piece of a bigger picture anyway.
That's another thing. I think we talked about this with Miguel some last time, but like, it's that idea, like when you're picking a topic or when you're picking something to be invested in, don't go with like one case or one thing. I don't think, unless it's happened to you, that's different, right? But like if you build your entire world around one case and that something about that case falls through, then you're sort of left with nothing.
Yeah.
Or at least, I don't think you're left with nothing, but the impression is you're left with nothing, right? Because I still think there's value even in cases that have holes in them, right? So like whenever I look for trends or something, I look for like, enough that I'm going to present you with 5 things. And if one of them's false, well, there's still four other examples of this trend. So like, that's again, that idea of authenticity insurance that I think is really important.
I want to
actually.
I want to take a quick moment and go back to that whole APA deep dish thing, because you guys lost me there.
Well, actually, let me reveal my ignorance. Josh, what is the difference between APA and Chicago style?
I think it's just in terms of the way that you cite just in terms of the order that you can hear me Googling in the background.
Because I'm looking at your book, I'm looking at Where the Footprints End Volume 2, and I'm like, I thought this was Chicago style.
Well, I think that, that's why I said mine is kind of hybrid form.
Because then you said deep dish, which I was assuming meant pizza, and I went,
no,
I've lost track now.
We were just saying Chicago style versus.
It's a dumb joke that I use. Yeah,
I think. Sorry, go ahead. I think it also has to do with the fact that Chicago style, and again, I'm sure there's some librarian out there who's screaming at me, so I apologize. But I believe that Chicago style also includes in-text citations. So in other words, last name, date in parentheses.
Well, I didn't think that was the case, but I have no idea.
Yeah, it might not be. I also believe that Chicago style lists full names at the end. In the bibliography.
Okay.
So you'd say, instead of saying, J period Cutchin, or Cutchin comma J period, you'd say Joshua Cutchin, so and so and so and so.
Or Cutchin comma Joshua.
Yeah.
Joshua
Seriah.
Joshua Crutchin.
Cutchin. I get that. But and like the whole in-text citation thing, where you've got like the last name of the author and the date in parentheses at the end of the sentence, I feel like that gets real clumsy real quick, and it really beefs up the body of your work. Because what if I want to put something? What if I want to put an aside at the end of the sentence? Do I put the parentheses beforehand, and then that looks kind of clunky too? So, and with as many things as I cite, I probably oversight stuff. Because I want to be really clear about where things come from. But with as many citations as I have, I think that it would just sort of be like the broomsticks in Fantasia that keep multiplying and dumping the water, because I literally am at, like, I think 2,800 endnotes for this latest project that I'm on.
Well, and that was an issue that Graham Hancock had too, because he had so many people attacking him that he made sure to cite every single thing in the book thoroughly. And when he wrote fiction, he's like, I need a break. He's like, I don't want to write another book where I have to cite everything exhaustively just to even, be ignored anyway,
Well, and that's something that I can't emphasize enough. Like, you remember there was that meme going around Facebook, like, your job description, what I do, what I think I do.
Yeah.
And, like, I think what people think I do is I, sit down in a nice study with a scotch and I write about the paranormal. But really what it is is mostly just chasing down sources. And making sure that I can get, like, you'd be surprised how many times I find a source and, like, the good example, right? So I have a bunch of different sources that I go to, and one of them is the old Albert Rosales database, which is a great resource for people to have. Albert took this down from being online a while back. I save them, I keep them, I have them. I do not distribute them to anyone, so don't ask, because they're not mine to distribute. They're Albert's, right? But I still use them. And Albert never makes stuff up, right? But sometimes it is difficult to find out where his source is from the way that he's listed it. Sometimes I'll bug him about it, but I don't like to bug people, multiple times a week about this sort of thing. So I'm trying to track down the source. And like, I would say there's a good 25 to 40% of my writing process is just tracking down sources and making sure that I've got all that information right. Because I want to try to provide as accurate a reading of where these things come from. And, to do that, you kind of have to learn some tricks, I think. I had a talk with Patrick Weege, a novelist who published my first 3 books. And Patrick said, "You must have a huge library, Josh." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's sizable. I have a bunch of books that I've got." But there is a style of research that you can do thanks to the internet that is extremely helpful. Google Books is a great tool, especially if you're doing comparative analysis, you can often find in the preview function a great quote. And you don't have to buy a book on, 17th century Japanese pottery because you want to have one sentence from it. You know what I mean? you can find that on Google Books, and you can go with it from there. Same thing with Amazon has a function that says click to search inside. You can sometimes search the interior of a book without having to buy the whole book.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know Amazon had that. I knew about Google Books.
I mean, because my bibliography is 12-point font right now for this new project, and it's like 86 pages, right? Just of entries. I'm not going to buy all those books.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
And I don't think there's anything dishonest in using a feature, a service like Google Books or a service like Kindle. I'll be honest with everyone. Like sometimes there isn't a preview section, and there's a Kindle product, and I'll buy the Kindle, I'll check out the reference, and I'll return the Kindle just like I'm borrowing a book at a library. Interlibrary loan though is great.
Yep.
If you are anywhere near your institution where you from which you graduated and you can have access to the library, that is a huge tool. Interlibrary loan's been squirrely because of COVID.
Wait, you can return a Kindle book?
Yes.
Is there like
within a certain period of time?
Yeah, you have to return it real quick. I mean, like I've never kept one like more than like 10 minutes because I'm usually looking for like one statement, right?
Right.
Although I think there are some programs where you can sort of like rent books. I mean, like I know that on archive.org, that's another great reference. Archive.org has sort of a checkout function where you can check out a book like as if it were a library. And you've got like a digital 48-hour pass to search through the book, which is digitized for the book, which is digitized. You've got archive.org, you've got Gutenberg.org, you've got there really are a lot more resources out there than I think people are aware of. Special shout out in terms of the paranormal sphere are Isaac Coy's resources that he has online. I don't know if either of y'all are familiar with that.
No.
He's digitized a ton of UFO magazines, some older UFO books. It's not the best collection of digitized UFO books I've found, but obviously there are a lot more copyright issues with that. But old newsletters, old reports, old magazines, he's digitized a ton of them. And that is files.afu.se. And Isaac, I believe that's a pseudonym. But he is constantly in the process of digitizing a lot of this stuff.
That's cool.
And it's a great resource. I mean, it's such a good resource that I don't use a ton of it because it's so much that I don't want to fall down that rabbit hole, right? You know what I mean? So like part of my process, and I'm just rambling right now. I'm sorry, I'm dominating the conversation.
Right.
Well, actually, I actually had a couple questions that are sort of related to stuff we've just been talking about. Since we're on the topic of where you can find sources and whatnot, talking about libraries and interlibrary loan and everything, I was curious, where do you start with that stuff? Like, part of what I have seen, especially from like what you guys, you and Tim did with the Bigfoot books, is a lot of these what seem to be a lot of older texts. Did any of those, or did many of them come from actual like going to a library or like I know Tim will go like read newspapers and do the whole microfilm thing and whatnot. Is that what's that like? Where do you start with that?
Surprisingly enough, I go to a library about once or twice per book. No, sorry, not a library, like the University Library, University of Georgia, right? I'm about an hour and a half away from Athens, so it's kind of hard for me to get out there, especially with two toddlers. But I'll find a lot of references to things, sometimes endnotes, footnotes in books. Sometimes, again, looking for something that looks like a great source on Google Books, and you click it and it gives you what's called snippet view, which is like 2-sentence screenshot, right? And you're like, this looks like it's really good. So what I generally do is I make a list of those books that I would like to get, and I find out through a couple of different places where I can get them. Worldcat.org is a great reference to find out if there is a library near you that has a copy of a book that you're looking for, and it has libraries from all over the world listed. You can plug in a book name and it will tell you, oh yeah, there's a copy of that. Maybe sometimes it's 2 hours away. Sometimes you luck out and it's like 30 minutes away, right?
Sure.
So that's a great resource. But what I'll do is I'll have a bunch of these books, and a large university library like UGA's will often have a lot more stuff than you realize.
Yep.
And there is sort of a spooky undercurrent to the university system here in Georgia, because the University of West Georgia has like all of Raymond Moody's stuff. All that NDE stuff is housed over there. So like you can find a lot of paranormal books, but also if you're doing the comparative thing or the folklore thing, you're going to find a lot of those books at a university library anyway. So I would say that like probably 75% of the books that I'm looking for that I don't own, that I'm interested in, I will find probably at the university library. And so I'll go there and I'll find them on the library website, and I'll go to the library, and if I can check them out, and it's not too many, I'll check them out. I'll also just take if it's a section of a book, I'll open it up and I say, wow, there's this paragraph is really relevant. I'll take a picture of it with my phone, and then I'll take a picture of the copyright information.
Yeah.
Not to print or redistribute, but just to have like the source from where I saw it. But also, man, the amount of stuff that you find serendipitously just walking through the stacks, You're looking for a book and you're scanning the spines, and you'll see something that's like, man, this sounds really good. And you open it up, and for me, invariably, I find something in there that's really useful. So that's a big part of it too.
I think I found communion that way.
Really?
I was at the local library in Minneapolis, which is enormous. It's like a 4-story library, and it's enormous to me. I grew up in a small town, but was walking through the shelves. There had like a section on UFOs and probably related stuff, and I was looking at like I don't know, it had like the Andreessen Affair and some other books there, and then I saw Communion, and I was like, what is this? Picked it up and read the back cover, and I don't think I did check that out, and then eventually I ended up buying a copy of it too. But
was the face on the spine?
No, it was a really new version that was like it's like a pale blue cover with just a UFO on it. So I missed out on the whole face thing. I had to Google it to see what you're talking about.
I don't remember how I found Communion. I think a friend of mine read it and told me and lent it to me and told me I should read it. But usually I didn't find tons of stuff at my local library. I would do interlibrary loans for stuff, especially like when I first learned about Kundalini. They had Kundalini books, but not here. They were like in the Ithaca library and stuff. So I was able to get them that way. But a lot of stuff I found was going into places like Borders. Having those bookstores with a large section of metaphysical or paranormal, whatever they wanted to label it, stuff. Yeah. Sometimes I just, that's how I found one of John Mack's books early on. I'm like, what's this? This looks good, Yeah, Borders
used to really curate their sections well. I think that's actually where I got the term speculative nonfiction from. That was their section for anomalies, which I love as a title for this stuff.
I definitely found Andrew Collins' stuff there. That's where I first found him, because I was looking at it going, Ashes of Angels. I'm like, is this about angels? And then I'm looking at it, I'm like, I don't think it's about angels. It looks like it's about lost civilizations. And then I saw it was the same artist who did the Fields of the Nephilim artwork on his book. And I'm going, this artwork looks familiar. And I'm like, and I can't remember the name of the woman who did the artwork. And I saw that, and he thanks Carl McCoy in Fields of the Nephilim. And I'm like, okay, I'm buying this. And then it was, on lost civilizations.
Yeah, that is awesome.
But that's thanks to Borders, cool.
Oh man, and used bookstores. I love used. Yep. You can find so many gems in those. Like you can, if you know what you're looking for, and honestly, sometimes if you don't know what you're looking for, but you can walk away with some stuff that's great. I found a great book on monuments that I picked up. Monuments and the stone circles and megaliths and that sort of thing that I picked up that I've used in the book a lot from just like browsing in a used bookstore. It just jumped out at me. It's great.
I've gotten tons of books. In fact, the first Seth book I ever had came from a used bookstore, It was like $1.50 at this basement bookstore in the Commons in Ithaca called Shoestring Books. And I was like, well, you know what? Maybe I'll buy it. This might be good for a laugh at some point. And then years later, I actually pick it up and read it, and I'm like, huh, this is not what I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, it's great when something surprises you like that. You, actually get the chance to read it.
Or the Who Built the Moon book at Borders. And it was like an hour and a half away, and I'm looking at it going, who built the moon? I'm like, no, I'm not going to buy this. And I kept picking it up, putting it back, picking it up, putting it back. And then finally I didn't get it. And I got home and I went, I should have got that book. And drove the hour and a half back the next day to buy the book.
Yeah, you got to do what you got to do.
Yeah.
I'm like, watch it not be there because it was only one copy.
But it was.
It was.
It was fated.
Yeah.
And totally worth reading.
Another question I had was, we were kind of talking about sources, and you'd mentioned some, I think it was with the Brimstone Deceit, finding out after the fact that a source was maybe from a hoax. How can you tell if a source is reliable, or what kind of techniques do you use to try to test the credibility of a source?
So I'm going to be completely honest with you, because I was sort of talking with Miguel about this, about how to figure out what we do and don't believe. But I think part of it is just getting involved in this and getting a feel for what sounds like it's truthful and not, which I know is kind of a dumb, not dumb, but a sort of cheap way out from your question. There are some sources there are some periods in time that start to sound, that start to give you some red flags. For example, there's a lot of stories from like the fall of the Berlin Wall that came out of the former Soviet countries that are just absolutely bonkers, and they're really elaborate and fantastical, and I include a lot of those in some of my work, but there's some that even I read, even with my love of high strangeness, and I'm like, I can't put this in there because it sort of violates that cardinal rule of being too tidy, I guess, right?
Oh, sure.
So what I mean by that is, like, it reads like Star Wars as opposed to reading like it reads like Star Wars as opposed to looking like a Dali painting. You know what I mean?
Sure.
I mean, like a good example that I found today was in the Rosales database, and it was let's see here. It was a woman who was in a cemetery in Northford, Connecticut. And she said, and the way that I wrote it up was a 2-foot by 2-foot helmet object appears on the ground near All Saints Cemetery in Northford, Connecticut, attended by a static sound. The primary witness watches blinking lights on the object before twice hearing, "Oops, we goofed," inside her head. Retreating to a nearby monument, she returns to find the object gone. That's for me like a classic example of a high strangeness case, right?
Yeah.
Because it's pretty straightforward. Doesn't have the super elaborate mythology. It just has one thing that is like super comical stuck into it, right? So that's one thing. I generally tend to steer away from self-reported websites. Websites in general, honestly. Although some stories are too good to not include, and sometimes I know the researcher behind the story, who might give it some credence or this or that or the other. But for the most part, like, in other words, I'm not gonna cite a source as like a forum post unless I'm trying to prove a point about the way that a community thinks about something. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Okay, sure.
In that case, if I'm illustrating like almost like the sociological aspects of it, that's a different story. But like, so if there's a name, there's certain names that I recognize that I'll treat as credible. Certain organizations that I'll treat as credible. Honestly, if it appeared in a UFO newsletter, like a print UFO newsletter pre-internet era, I'll usually include it in there, because again, if it turns out to be a hoax or something, I mean, I might do a quick Google search to see if it specifically has been debunked. But if it turns out to be a hoax on down the line, people know exactly where that hoax came from, and it wasn't So it's kind of a combination of factors in just passing the smell test. But again, some stories I include, and I'm sure that there's one that I just wrote the other day that is just like the goofiest thing you've ever seen. But I have a real soft spot for high strangeness. But it's one of like, in this project, I'm including appendices because I have certain bodies of evidence that I feel like are so strong that like, no, I really do want to list all 15 of these cases, you know? So if one of those is wrong, well, that's 1 out of 15 that's wrong. If 2 is wrong, it's 2 out of 15, you know what I mean? So,
and I feel like there's kind of another element to what we're dealing with as regards to the paranormal or to high strangeness or whatever is, at the end of the day, this is not the type of stuff that is objectively provable. You know, like we were talking earlier about religion, about God being provable or not, right? Like part of the thing with this is that it's subjective experiences and their stories, and we kind of have to approach this, I think, with a grain of salt. Whether you're writing about it and recording people's stories from sources, or if you're somebody reading a book, like reading one of your books or something, rather than taking it as gospel about, being absolutely true. But I think having this material and having, the kind of philosophical thought and like probing and questioning what's going on here and what it means in our lives is a valuable thing. And I think it's something that we can take in a lot of different valuable directions.
I literally could not agree more. I think about something I said a while back, maybe it was in the Thieves in the Night, that it's not the validity of any individual case that really gives Fortean power for me, right? I think that it's in those connected, those bits of connectivity where like you see something cropping up in a 1950s Iowa farmer's account that perfectly mirrors something that was in a text about demons from the 16th century that there's no way he would have read. That's where I find that's where the comparative aspect is where I find so much strength. But even so, even if every single thing I write about in the book is false, there's also something beautiful about those mytho-poetic similarities that you see cropping up time and time again. And I think it says something about what human beings are, right? So once you stop saying, I only want to put in the true cases, as long as you're not willingly or knowingly putting in a false case and presenting it as true, like knowingly doing that, then it kind of doesn't matter. Like just use your best judgment and say where it came from. And if it illustrates a point, put it in there. And if you think that it illustrates a point, but you kind of don't believe it, make a note about how, even you as the author think that this part of it strains credulity,
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that seems relatively unique to the paranormal or the metaphysical kind of in general, because it is so subjective.
Yeah. I kind of wonder if it maybe has some roots in postmodernism too.
What do you mean?
Not that lack of looking towards the power of a statement rather than its objective.
Literal.
Yeah, it's literal meaning. Yeah, the power behind its meaning rather than its literal meaning.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And I like that idea of mytho-poetic similarities between the things, kind of adding that sort of gravitas to it. That's a good way to phrase that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that again, if none of what is written about us in the books like I write or the podcasts that we talk about, if none of it's true, it's still a map of human thought patterns, right? Like it's still a map of belief systems. It's still a map of the way that we interact with things,
Right.
And I think that has its own value in and of itself. But I think that a lot of people can't quite get past that because a lot of them really are invested in like the reality of these things. Is it real or is it not? And I don't know what to tell you other than the fact that if you're waiting on something like alien disclosure, like disclosure has to happen for yourself. And if you're really determined, you can get a Ouija board and go to an abandoned mental asylum, at midnight one night. You can probably get something to happen that'll convince you that there's something to it. But Yeah.
So
that's gnosis.
So,
yeah. That's a much better way of putting it. Yeah, you're exactly right.
Because you can sit around all day asking the church to tell you or prove to you that God is real, but until you experience that reality for yourself, it's it's not the same thing. You know what I mean? Anyway, sorry, Seriah.
No, that's okay. I totally forgot what I was going to say. Oh, so the binary thing of is this real or is it not? I mean, that's the wrong question. I mean, we have throughout history and throughout cultures the same experiences from all different people. So obviously there is something going on. So is it real? Yes. What is it? Well, that's a completely different question. You know, what type of reality is it? Who knows at this point? But we can definitely say that there's something. There's something that causes these experiences, whether it be something very, very, very built into the human experience or something completely other. It could be anywhere from one extreme to the other, or probably somewhere in between. But that you can say that, yes, there's something there, if nothing else.
Yeah.
Something that's affecting a person's life and causing somebody causing them to change their belief system or their, make certain choices.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this sort of comes into some of the ideas that Charles Fort talked about with the idea of societal dominance. Dominance, not dominance.
Dominos?
Yeah, dominos. I play dominos, you play dominos. The idea that certain paradigms dominate certain points in a society's history, where things literally become true or untrue depending on the culturally held validity of it. So, I think that some people have claimed that we're sort of entering the dominant of witchcraft right now. In terms of, which would correspond to the magical renaissance and the way that reality itself seems to be falling apart at the seams every day when I go up and check the news. But I mean, and this sort of ties into real Terrence McKenna ideas, about as we approach this transcendental object at the end of time, we're just sort of becoming embedded in greater and greater circles of novelty. And I think that anyone who wants to really sort of understand this decade that we're in would do themselves well to listen to some of old St. Terry's lectures on novelty, for sure.
Yeah, but he also did the Timescape Zero thing and then changed it to match up with the Aztec calendar.
Yeah, but he also okay, yes and no. I mean, so I think that an argument can be made that the Timewave Zero thing and the whole, it was kind of ties into bigger issues about the 2012 thing, right? Like, I think an argument can be made that things have definitely seemed to go off the rails since then. Like, I think that the conductor of the train left the wheel, left the lever of the train far before 2012, but I think 2012 was when the train actually started slipping off the tracks. You know what I mean?
Well, but the point in the Timewave Zero thing, which he created a pattern that would point out novelty in human experience. So when he laid it out, it kind of like showed more novelty during like things like World War II and stuff like that. And it was 2016 that hit the point of ultimate novelty.
Oh, see, I didn't know this.
Yeah, and then he changed it to 2012, not based on his scale, but based on the Aztec calendar. And I was like, why would you do that? 2016 was the date you came up with, and 2016 is really, I think, more significant than 2012 as far as the way things have changed in our culture.
Yeah, probably true.
Yeah, but 2016 also feels like, we had stomach cramps for a couple of years, and 2016 is when the diarrhea really hit. You know what I mean?
The point of ultimate novelty.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, possibly. I mean, the news cycle has gotten so darn exhaustively fast, and just nonsense every day. Yeah.
Interestingly, what was the thing he said about 2016? Seth said something about 2016 too. Seth didn't make a
Really?
lot of predictions, but he said something about 2016.
Interesting. I'd like to find out what that is. If you can find that, send it my way.
I
'cause
want to
that's interesting.
say that he said it would be the next incarnation of the same person who was like Jesus,
When did sorry, go ahead.
and that they would be able to actually show people their past lives, so that ultimately this would wake people up. Because, you know, things like racism and stuff change if you realize you had a past life as someone who was not what you are now.
Right. It's
Sure.
I mean, and I would argue that stuff like racism is like all surface level ego stuff from that sort of reincarnative position. And then once you realize that we're all sort of individual waves and concresses on this giant sea of consciousness that sort of rise and fall back down, that we're all sort of part of the same soup, it seems like the truly idiotic position that it is.
Yeah.
When was CERN first fired up? Was that 20?
No, 2007. Yeah, 2007.
Okay. Oh, well.
Well, that's when the universe was destroyed. We just didn't realize it.
Yeah, right.
Well, it's been like I guess what you call like a ripple effect ever since then, right? The universe began to be destroyed, and this is just the after effects. It really does, though. It really does feel like, you know, I mean, regardless of what date you want to throw on things, that we are cresting, right? And I think I like this concept of the like the Yuga cycle that you guys talk about and stuff.
Yeah.
I like the concept of a sort of great cycle or a great shift that's propelling us in different ways. And I like the idea that it will shake up what we have and will shake up what's been, you know, for especially the last several hundred years, but, you know, I mean, even going further back, thousands of years, into something more holistic and more, psychically and spiritually inclined.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's the thing that always gets me is like everything else on this planet has a cyclicality to it. Then the idea that societies, empires, technological advancement wouldn't be cyclical as well, I think is pretty foolish.
Well, that's the whole impact of Darwinism. That things always get more advanced. There's no such thing as cyclic. It's all, you know, starts low and then goes high.
An endless progress forward, which is really like seems just as misguided as the endless growth model of capitalism, right? And
right.
It's sort of the same thing, you know. Yeah.
Well, to get us back on the conversation of research and stuff, if you guys are okay with that.
Where did the road go? No, yeah, I was trying to think of a good segue, and I couldn't come up with one. So I'm very glad we did.
Sometimes there's great segues. Sometimes
hard cut.
Sometimes there's just razor scooters. One of the other questions I had on here, I labeled it pesky research. When your Google food just isn't working, what do you try? So I think we've kind of talked about that a little bit, but like if you have a story someone's given you, or you've got an avenue you want to explore, and you're just not hitting anything. You're not finding books. You're not finding any sources online to either corroborate it or provide any kind of interesting information about it. What do you do? Do you abandon that avenue? What do you do?
Well, for me, it depends on what it is. You know, if it's, I mean, there's certain people that I have in my paranormal Rolodex at this point, and obviously this is something that you don't have when you're first starting out, right? But I know some people, some friends of mine who have literal memory palaces for this stuff. Like I've talked to them, I'm like, how do you keep all this straight? And he's like, oh no, I literally have like a Sherlock Holmes style memory palace. So I have a couple people that are experts on certain things, and I'll confide with them. And I'll be honest, like a lot of times if I can't find someone who can validate a source, or someone who can clarify a question, or someone who can point me in the right direction of something, and I ask those cats, you know, I kind of abandon it, you know.
Okay.
Not without great sadness, you know. I mean, one thing that has been a dead end for me that I still included in the new book, and I included it with the idea of like sort of framing it as like, you know, what wouldn't it be cool, is like I'm convinced that somewhere out there there has to be a journal of an Irishman who was walking beside or stumbled upon one of these Native American mounds, right? And thought that it was a fairy mound,
Right.
Oh, Moira, I saw a fairy mound today, in their journal. And
Sure.
like, I know that has to be out there, because like you look at some of these mounds, and even the hingiform construction with the ditches on the moats on the inside of the perimeter wall, like that's what my Strange Realities presentation is actually going to be about. This year is about these monuments and how there's such a similarity. Of course, some people will point to like Atlanteans or something. I think that the shared component is not necessarily a shared civilization or anything. I think that it's the shared element is the human element, right? I think it's like the bow and arrow, right? It arose independently because it just works. So I think that a lot of these shapes arose independently because they just work in terms of contacting the other world. But I was never able to find that elusive diary entry, and so I just included like, I'm sure that somewhere out there's got to be that. And invariably what happens is after the book has been out for like 3 months, somebody will be like, oh yeah, this is exactly what you're looking for, and you're like, okay, well, I'll file that away for
that's interesting. And that makes me wonder, in the crazy way that I wonder, is it that you're the positing of that situation in the book brought that into reality? Or is it, like if you search and search and search and you don't ever find this journal, but someone else just happens to have it? Or, it reminds me of a similar situation to where, especially with with this show, but also with Strange Familiars, Tim is always talking about how, somebody comes on and talks about a specific story or a situation, and then a bunch more people will reach out and say they've had a very similar thing happen.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I mean,
what is that? Are we building? Are we generating these things into the world, or is it just bigger exposure can allow those things to bubble up?
I think it's the second, honestly.
Okay.
I mean, I can see both arguments, honestly, and
Yes.
sometimes it's one thing and sometimes it's the other. I do think that there's something to be said about and any young lovers looking to get married, like take this under advisement. Like, the universe prefers paths of least resistance, and whenever you try to force something, that's when you get all that resistance, right? It's when you meet all that resistance, and I think that's why beginner's luck is a thing, That's why you have game trails, and that's why water has relatively predictable flow patterns. And I think that also applies to like some of the effort that we put into things to try to make things work, relationships that are too much work, or like, that job that is trying to make it work. Things need to feel effortless to be efficient, I think. And I think something similar happening there.
Sometimes you need a challenge too.
Yeah, but it has to be a challenge that, I mean, yeah, I would agree with that. Like, restriction, especially like in art and stuff, is often like, the mother of invention, right?
So I have a book story. As I was working on my personal book, there was a book I read back in late 91 or early 92 that I took a lot of notes from. I had gotten from the library, called The Art of Tantra or something like that, but it talks, so Tantra, most people associate with sex, and there's an element to that, but there's also a lot of science and other stuff that connect. And
sexy science.
So I'm like, I should see if I can get a copy of that book again, since it seemed to have a pretty big influence on me back then. I wonder how I would interpret it now. So I looked it up on Amazon, and it's selling for roughly $800. And I was like, well, that's not going to happen. So then I just did a normal Google search and came up with one at like Abe's Books or something like that for $5. And I was like, okay, cool. So I ordered it, and they immediately canceled it and said they didn't actually have it. And I was like,
interesting.
Great. So then there was another one, Albie's Books or something like that also had it for $5. So I put it in my cart, and it said, do you want to make an account? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Why not? So I make the account. The book's in my cart. I get done making the account. The book's no longer in my cart. And I'm like, where'd the book go? And so I go back to the page it was on, and it says, this book is in your cart. I'm like, cool. So I go to the cart. There's no book. So I go back to the page, and I say, remove book from cart. And it says, this book is not in your cart. And I'm like, what the hell is going on? So I log out, it's still not there. I log back in, it's still not there. So I look on the site and find another book for another copy for like 10 cents more. And that one I was finally able to order. But the whole time I'm thinking, am I not supposed to read this book? Like, what's going on here?
So you mentioned Abe. It's ABE actually is the name of that company, and I think they're now owned by Amazon.
Oh, really?
Unless that's Alibris I'm thinking of. Alibris, Abe, or ABE, and Amazon are kind of the three big ones for cataloging books on the internet. So it's, as far as I understand, it's basically a big repository of where books are being sold online. So people who are selling books, for instance, at the bookstore I work at, we'll sell books online through magusbooks.com, but then we'll also host them on Amazon, which is I think a separate thing, or on ABE or on Alibris, and we'll kind of like put the postings up there so that people can like find them easier. It's actually one of the bigger ones that I found.
Huh.
But,
well, I'm just startled that it was going for $800 on Amazon and $5 everywhere else.
That is the tricky thing about books, especially old books that are out of print, is if they're not available easily, people will just put them up for astronomical prices and hope someone buys them. I collect occult books, and in looking for a lot of them, you find stuff that's going for, or quote unquote going for, like $5,000. And you can check back months later and it hasn't moved. It's still exactly the same book. Sometimes it'll be cut in half too, the price.
Yeah, and the algorithm, the Amazon algorithms are kind of funny too. I've seen temporary spikes on books that I've had out there of like into the hundreds of dollars for like brand new releases that are completely available elsewhere. I think that there must be some sort of second sellers or second party buyers who have some sort of computer code that reassigns values that are just far outside the realm of anything.
Well, look what people would do with the missing 411 stuff, because Paulides wouldn't put it on Amazon, because he doesn't make as much of a profit if it's on Amazon, and then other people would buy it from him and put it on Amazon for twice as much as you could get it from him, but they could just get it from Amazon.
Right, exactly.
Someone had suggested that he was doing that himself, and I'm thinking, well, if he is, that's a smart move,
Yeah, I don't think he is, but
I don't think he is either. But I mean, I wouldn't, if he did, I wouldn't blame him. If other people can sell your $25 book for $50,
Yeah. Yay, capitalism. Right? But the other thing about Amazon too is that, like, if you see somebody bragging about like the number one book and this or that, like those are also pretty ephemeral rankings as well. They come and go and are sort of based on like a moment by moment. Like, I guess what I'm saying is like the longitudinal window for sales ranking is not as big as it should be to prove actually like how many copies have actually sold. So in other words, like it's the number one book this hour instead of like, it's the number one book this week. I believe that's the way it works, because I've had some. Yeah, it's not. Yeah, it's something to be proud of. It's something to be proud of, but it's not like number one times bestseller, right?
Yeah.
Well, on that subject, the New York Times bestsellers list, I learned fairly recently that it's actually so they put books on that list based on number of sales under a certain threshold from specific bookstores. And so what people will do, or what has been done, I should say, I don't know that everybody does this, but it has been done, is that somebody will go around to the various bookstores which are known to report to the New York Times and buy the right amount. So it's right under the threshold of wholesale. I think it's like 24 copies. And they'll just buy them from this store. Yeah. There was one person in particular who I'd heard about doing this and got I think her book up on the New York Times bestsellers list very quickly, even though it was a brand new book. It was her first book, and like she had very little publication about it. And it turned out that she was the one buying all of them. And she made a claim that she was buying them for, to sell them, that she was getting them from these bookstores because she wanted to support the bookstores. and then she was going to sell them on her website or sell them in person or something like that. But it was very, very suspicious because she was buying them from all these stores that report to the New York Times.
Yeah.
And if you buy wholesale from these stores, they don't report those numbers to the New York Times. They only report what's under their wholesale threshold.
Right.
It's kind of strange.
Well, that's like, when, and I don't know if it's still this way because there's not as many physical copies out there, but you would always hear like about music, oh, this album shipped platinum. And all that means is that they sent out enough albums to record stores that if they all sold, the record would go platinum. It doesn't mean any of them actually sold. So you can sell 5 records and it's still considered platinum because they sent those out.
Well, how do they do that nowadays with everything basically?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I don't know how they do it now. I knew that from when I worked at a record store, and I started looking at like, what is this whole shipped platinum thing? And it's like, oh, that's how many copies we get. They shipped out enough copies to make it go platinum, and they just assume they all sell.
Yeah. This is something you start to realize because it's like the same sort of thing that you would see with like Nielsen ratings. It's just like if you get garbage in to your statistics, you get garbage out from your statistics too, or from your metrics. And
it's a self-perpetuating thing. So if the album is listed as, oh, this shipped platinum, people are like, well, it must be good. I better go buy it.
Right. Which, I mean, that's magic, right?
Yeah. That's, in a way. Yeah, I mean, Nielsen's, you could have, it was like, what, one home represented 100,000 people? So if that one home watched a show and the rest of the people didn't, you still get a list of 100,000 people watching that show.
There should be better ways to do that kind of thing nowadays, right? Because the Nielsen stuff, you had to have like a physical. I guess I don't know what they do now, but back in the day, I know you had to have like a physical box that you would like program in who was watching and when, how many people.
Yep.
But nowadays, especially with like online streaming and accounts, it must be much easier to track that kind of stuff.
It's easier, but they still are very, very hesitant to release numbers, the streaming platforms themselves, because I think they're afraid. It might be an emperor has no clothes things, but I think that the impressions are different because you have a lot more people like turning stuff off halfway, and I don't think they've quite figured out how to manage that either.
That and there are privacy issues as well at stake.
Point.
I mean, when's that ever stopped a corporation?
Well, it hasn't, but they got to at least pretend. There was
I guess that's fair.
What did I see? There was a meme up that just said something like, "What if there was an app that you could just like take a picture of someone and it would give you their contact info and blah blah blah?" And the response was, a lot of girls would get killed.
Yes. Yep. Unfortunately, that's the world.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that sounds like a cool idea until you really think about it and understand what the world is like. And it's like, oh, yeah, that's a really bad idea.
The unfortunate thing is that's basically already our reality. Like you could take a picture, you can run it through Google, right?
Yes.
Like you can upload a picture to Google and it'll probably tell you, if that picture already exists, like it's someone's profile picture, for instance, it'll point you to where that picture is hosted on the internet, and you could click on their Facebook picture or whatever. And I mean, it's not quite their address or their phone number necessarily, but it's we're in it. We're in those waters.
Yes, yeah, we definitely are.
I mean, if you get if you can sort of crowdsource stuff like that enough, if it's an important enough person, like I've heard stories about people figuring out where an Instagram celebrity lives from like the reflection in their wine glass or something, like picking out context clues and whatnot.
Now if we could just apply that type of like stuff to things that matter rather than where a Instagram celebrity lives,
to positivity and good. There's a pretty famous account, so a lot of people were talking about this Netflix show or movie called Don't F with Cats. I haven't seen it, but back in the day, I had heard about this situation where somebody had posted a video. Some terrible person had posted this video of himself hurting his dogs, like doing something violent to his dogs.
Right. Yeah.
And he posted it onto 4chan, and 4chan's the home of Anonymous, so to speak. And the story was basically that, and I don't know if this is true, but the story was that Anonymous used that video and used his internet connection or his IP, figured out where the guy lived, stalked him, and then burned his house down.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, doxing is not cool, folks.
I don't know though. If you're torturing a dog, maybe you deserve it.
Yeah, but the question always is if the information is if the person is doing what is being claimed and if it's the correct person.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
That's the main issue that I always come up with.
It also doesn't necessarily justify a crime like arson, but I mean, there's ethical considerations, I guess. But it's exactly what causes like swatting and stuff like that. Is somebody clever figuring out how to dox somebody.
SWATing. Remind me what that is.
So basically, people will be like streaming on Twitch, and they'll be playing a video game.
Oh yes, okay. Yeah, go on.
Somebody will, so somebody in their audience, some jerks in their audience will call in like a bomb threat or a terrorist threat or something to the location. I don't know exactly how they get the location. I'm guessing it has to do with like IP addresses or something, but I'm not sure. And then what happens? It's terrible. It's not funny. But what happens is the police or like a SWAT team will show up and bust into this person's house and start clearing their house in the middle of their stream.
Yeah. That's really messed up.
Yeah.
And this is what some people do for fun. Again, imagine if this stuff was pushed toward a positive end.
Like figuring out where those mysterious sources are that disappear and finding that Irish journal.
Exactly. Exactly. That was an excellent segue. So, choosing a topic. I think I mentioned we started talking about choosing a topic for podcasts, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't think I ever talked about how I recommend people choose topics, but that's okay. We can skip that.
No, go into it.
Well, I guess my main thing that I want to say is that, whoever's listening and has a book in them, I love you, but we don't need another book on Roswell, right? I mean, unless you have something monumentally different to say, but it's got to be significantly different to say, right?
Yeah.
So I think something that is an approach that will yield endless, avenues of inquiry for people are to, number one, if there's something that you disagree with in the paranormal, research it and write a book about it and try to find some way that you can integrate it into your viewpoint, right? So that's part of what I've been doing. I didn't know where quite to stick the hybrid alien human hybrid thing in my UFO cosmology. With the way that I looked at the phenomena, and with this new project, I tell you what, I went so hard when people talk about pre-birth agreements with extraterrestrials, and we have ET souls and all these things. And that's a bias of mine that I'm trying to counter and trying to say, okay, well, these stories aren't going away. And some of these people seem to believe it, and it's not especially much more crazy than some of the stuff that you believe already. So can you figure out a way to make this work with your view of the phenomena? So that's one thing.
Well, also with that, you have people who remember not only past lives, but in between lives, kind of like planning out their current life.
Right, like waiting rooms, and they have these agreements, and and these and like I don't like that for those like Star Wars-y reasons, right? Because they sound really. I mean, not that I don't like Star Wars. I love Star Wars. Well, I loved Star Wars before everybody else loved Star Wars. It's a topic for another day. But like, what I mean by that.
So you're very hipster about Star Wars. Is that what you're saying?
Look, the idea that people would be talking about the Mandalorian when I like got made fun of for knowing the word Mandalorian back in like the 90s. Star Wars is as nerdy as football nowadays. But I guess what I'm saying is like I don't like I tend to recoil from those stories because they have that sort of Star Wars-y like super elaborate there's a place for everything, everything's connected, and there are names for these different factions. We've got the Uba Gubans and this is Ambassador Sarpan and like all these different when it gets that elaborate, I kind of like, this starts to sound like it's, kind of just complete fabrication or delusion or fantasy. But that's a bias that I have to check. And those sort of pre-birth memories, those sort of memory of the afterlife, or memory of the in between lives space, those do not go away. Like, those are still very much out there. And I'm super sympathetic to reincarnation, so it should stand to reason that something like that is actually occurring. So I have to, that's up to me to sort of reconcile that.
Why are you sympathetic to reincarnation in light of the rest of that?
A lot of the Ian Stevenson stuff I find really compelling. A lot of his research that he's found, a lot of these stories, while anecdotal, of kids having memories of details that are verified later through historical record. Now, of course, being Where Did the Road Go, we could throw in there that, maybe it's some sort of spirit or some sort of morphogenetic field that's coming through. I mean, maybe. I think there's a certain simplicity that implies that reincarnation is what's actually going on. And
I would agree.
There's also a universality to it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You find it across so many disparate cultures that suggests to me that there's also something to it as well.
It's not proof of reincarnation. It is very suggestive of reincarnation.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and I think that universality is also an important factor.
Yeah.
But I think it's, what you just said a little bit ago here about checking that bias. That is something that I would love to do more. You know what I mean? Like, that's something I don't probably do enough. But I think we could all benefit from. It was just making me think about reptilians, because that's something that basically, from the day I heard about that theory, I guess the first time I heard about it was watching the TV show V.
So you're talking about like straight up like David Icke style reptilians, right?
Right.
Or just reptilian aliens, or specifically like the queen is an alien and that reptoid and that sort of thing.
The latter, because I had not heard of that as a theory that people were putting forward as a serious thing until after I was exposed to it in like pop culture and sci-fi. But then I found out that some people actually, like David Icke, believe that that's a real thing. And it's immediately something that I just shut down. It's like, well, of course not. And also, when you look into this thing, it's very clearly, at least to me, very clearly rooted in some xenophobic and ultimately racist ideas. But I don't know, is that the type of thing that you could go through and try to sort of check that bias and do a research project on, and at least, I don't know, at the very least, maybe prove that it's false? I don't know.
Well, that reminds me of I think what you can also do is find ways to make some sort of sense of that. And one way to look at that would be to sort of look at the position of the dragon as a symbol of royalty, and maybe there's something about that on an archetypal level that people are tapping into. Not that the queen is literally a dragon, but the idea that we have dragon rulers is kind of consistent with a lot of medieval mythological ideas. That's not my idea. I can't remember who said that, but I heard that in a talk somewhere. So that's one way to approach it. But also, I mean, just finding out why people. I mean, look. We all believe dumb things. Some people believe more dumb things than others, and some people believe dumber things than others. But I think it can be just as interesting to find out why they believe that, right?
Yes,
like, what is the origin of this trope? I mean, so here's a good example, right? I think we talked about this a little bit on the Patreon segment that we recorded last time, Seriah. But like, I don't think that there are underground alien bases, right? I think that's kind of obviously that's not like offensive on a xenophobic level or like an anti-Semitic level or something like that you get with like reptilians. But let's just in terms of ideas that I don't find make much sense. So I don't have much utility in this idea of underground alien bases, but I can look at that and I can say, well, we have these earlier themes of, fairy folk living underground, and a lot of these alien bases happen to center around mountains, and mountains were, time and again seen as places for where the dead reside in pagan thought. So that gives me another angle on finding a way to incorporate that into the way that I think about the phenomena. Okay. I don't know if you can do that same thing with reptilians, but like trying to figure out why the idea took root in the first place, I think can be just as interesting. And you can do that from like the sociological angle. You can do that from like, a sort of, historical pragmatic angle, like Adam Gorightly's latest book.
Yep.
Or you can sort of do it from that symbolic mytho. I'm not going to say mytho-poetic. I've used up all my mytho-poetic chips for this conversation. And that sort of symbolic angle.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You kind of take it from like you said, sort of archetypal or, symbolic.
And this isn't to say that all conspiracy theories are created equal. They are not.
We're all theories.
Some of them are just straight up garbage. And some of them do active harm too. I want to make that very clear as well.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think that looking at it at least critically, and like you said, sort of checking your bias on it, and at the very least figuring out on what grounds you can dismiss that type of theory, rather than just like what I've done with that theory in particular is, heard about it and then went, that's preposterous, and moved on, right? Like instead of looking at where it comes from, looking at how it took root in society, looking at the impact of it and what, how that has affected people of, in different cultures or in different groups. I think that's a very poignant kind of thing to be doing.
Well, I think, and I feel like I don't want to turn this into like a narcissistic love fest or something, but about me. But like, I think what that does that I find really rewarding about it is it because it turns it into a puzzle almost, right?
Okay.
It turns into a puzzle of trying to figure out what it is, as opposed to just saying that's dumb and moving on. Trying to figure out what people are thinking and stuff.
No, I also tend to be of the camp that what you focus your intention and attention on has a tangible impact in your kind of day-to-day life too. So, that would strike me as finding things that could be maybe better uses of your time. I don't know how I'm phrasing this. Finding theories or finding avenues to kind of go down, rabbit holes to go down, that could be more positive puzzles to work on, I think is maybe a good way to do that. I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say.
Right. No, I think I catch what you're saying. And that's part of the abyss gazing back too, is that you want to make sure that you're not spending too much time looking at this stuff. So I had the conversation with some of my musician friends about like, I just want to grab them all and shake them and be like, if the past year and a half hasn't taught you how fragile your occupation is, and you haven't started a side hustle or doubled down on an existing side hustle, I don't know what to tell you. And I don't care if that means you're a garage band musician or you're a collegiate professor who teaches viola. Like, get a side hustle, because I also think it makes you a better and more interesting person. And I would say the same thing with the paranormal too. Like, the people who just don't stop looking at this stuff, it wants something from you. It takes something from you. It'll eat you and destroy your soul. And that's partially like, the Chapel Perilous thing, but it's also just, I think there's something actively drawing that can draw energy from this, or draw energy from me rather, if you get obsessed with it.
Yeah, I could see that. And I think that can be a destructive thing that can, and it certainly has in a lot of different cases, but I would hope that it could also be something that could be spun around and turned into a very positive, destructive force for the sacred, like transmutation.
A destructive force for the sacred. Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah.
Like breaking it down to build it up better.
Creation from destruction.
Yeah, exactly.
It's something that I think that a lot of people. I don't want to paint the last 16 18 months rather as rosy for people, as a rosy time, because we've lost loved ones and lost dreams and lost a lot of things. But I think a lot of people didn't entirely 2020 right. You know what I mean? Like, I think that it was a time to cast off a lot of those negative things, a time to push the reset button in our personal lives. And I think a lot of us just sat in stasis because we didn't know how long it was going to take,
Yep.
I myself had a pretty profound life change that I still haven't talked about publicly. We might do a show on that sometime, Seriah.
Okay.
But yeah, I myself had a life change, and I look back on it and I was like, oh yeah, of course this happened in 2020. Yeah, it's the controlled burn that clears away the brush, and refertilizes the land.
No, I think you're right.
All right. Anything else anyone wants to add here?
If you decide to write or do anything, I guess, really, I think discipline is key. It's never easy. Granted, it's not, coal mining or something, right? But it does take discipline, and it does take focus, and it does take determination. And writing a little bit every day is great. Keeping a notepad in the car for when you think of stuff, because the moment that you take your mind off of whatever you're working on is when you have the best ideas. I often joke that, like, I do my best writing between the desk and the fridge, like it's those moments where, like, a phrase will lock into my mind of what I'm trying to say.
Or audio recording if you have a phone with you. Voice memo thing.
Yeah, different strokes for different folks. So that's another thing that people could do.
For me, it's Google Keep, and I just have a book label. And so if I'm listening to an interview while I'm driving or something, I will literally pull over. I'll be like, oh, that's great. And I'll pull over and make a note and what interview it was in, et cetera, et cetera.
No, I've heard a lot of people use Evernote.
I liked Evernote until they started charging. Google Keep is free.
Oh, there you go. I'm still pretty analog when it comes to all this myself. My outlines are just running series of bullet notes or bullet points rather that I end up sort of coalescing into different subcategories. But yeah, I think the idea of having something like that, keep something beside your bed too.
Yes.
A number of times I think of something falling to bed, and if you think of something while falling to bed, write it down immediately because you will not remember it.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Falling to bed or falling to sleep,
and in your dreams, like things come to you in your dreams.
Yeah. I have a note from listening to an interview with you at some point, Josh, and I don't remember what it was, but it was something struck me about something you said, and I was like, oh, I need to pull over and write that down.
I said something profound.
It was something about. It was in the Trojan Feast. The interview was from.
Oh, that was way back in the day when I was like, "Hi, Seriah, can I talk to you on your show?"
You were already welcome on the show before you contacted me.
It's been a journey.
Yeah, because I heard you on the Grallian Report when that was still a thing, and I was like, I need to talk to this guy.
Well, yeah, and that was a big motivator for me. I just. Like, I kept on listening to podcasts, and I'm like, I have opinions that I want to share with these folks, and I want to talk to these folks, and I want to make them my friends. And some of them I have made my friends. Some of them I have not made my friends, but quite a few of them have. So.
You never quite know who you're going to click with.
Yep, that's true.
Yeah, it's very true.
So, all right. Well, that seems like a good place to stop. Thank both of you.
Thanks so much. It was a fun conversation.
And again, Taylor, your podcast is where?
Yeah, you can find that at, you just look up the Green Lion podcast, greenlionpublishing.com or greenlionpodcast.sounder.fm.
And Joshua, where can people find you?
I can be found at joshuacutchin.com. I will be speaking at the Strange Realities Conference, which the dates of that are... Sorry, help me out here.
14th, 15th,
October
16th?
Yeah, there we go.
15th, 16th, 17th.
Yeah, strangerealitiesconference.com. You can, I believe there's still some in-person tickets left, but definitely some digital tickets. I will also be speaking Thursday, October 28th, 2021, from 7 to 8:30 p.m. about altered states of consciousness and Bigfoot encounters at an online presentation through the East-West Bookshop in Mountain View, California. And the link for that is at eastwestbooks.org, and you can find the link there to my presentation that I'll be giving. So I'll see you. Love to see you digitally or in person if you're in Nashville.
All right.
And I will be attending Strange Realities, online. Was going to do it in person, but it did not work out this year. Maybe next year.
Yeah, same here. I'll be online for Strange Realities. So, all right.
Yeah, it'll be fun.
All right, thanks, y'all.
I want to take a moment here to give a special shout out to those patrons pledging $10 or more. Allison Cook, Super Inframan, Eric Hervin, Tim, Andrew Nichols, The 100th Monkey Project, A Blue 2nd Gen MR2 Drifting Around a Japanese Mountain, Patricia Giaquinta, Alex Whitcomb, American Rambler, Andrew Maines, Barbara Fisher, Beverly Williamson, Big Boy Limina, Charles Davis, Charles in Florida, Land of the Crazy and Communicable, Christopher Ernst, Craig Cicernos, Craig Parmenter, Crystal Ann Compton, David Moore, Denise Sarek, Diane B., Diona Bidwell, Dominic O'Malley, Duffy Dowder, Edu Camahort, MTK, Eric Citron, Eric Todd, J. Otto Bullitt, James Lattimore, Johanna Rojas, John W. Bracken, Carla Mahoney, Kevin Schreck, Kristen L., Linz Jackson K., Luke Osborne, Mark Bowley, Mark Brady, Matt in Delaware, Matthew Sproul, Patricia W., Paul Jeffries, Ray Benedetto, Riker and Stark, Roger Gonzalez, Sam Sharon, Sedgder, Martinez Saint, Stone Wilderness, Tactical Therapist, Taylor Bell, 36 Dingo, Thunderboy, Tyler Glimstead, Vincent Trewell, Walker, Will Gebhard, Will Powell, William Lovelace, Ren Collier, and Stephen D. Thank you all so very much for your awesome support, and thank you to all of my patrons, because without you, this show would not be possible. You have been listening to Where Did the Road Go? This show is made possible in part from our Patreons, and we thank you and everyone listening for helping us continue this exploration of the strange. You can always find everything Where Did the Road Go related at www.wheredidtheroadgo.com. And thank you so much for your support.